Hello, everybody. We're just going to hold for a couple of minutes, and I'll then introduce you to the webinar today. So get yourself a glass of water or whatever you like. Tomorrow's St. Paddy's, maybe a Guinness. Maybe it's a little bit early for that. So I will start now. I have some housekeeping I'm going to offer you before I introduce our fabulous guests. So welcome, everybody, and welcome back to those who have been a part of these wonderful sessions these last weeks, and to those who took part in any of our 2021 webinars. It's great to have you with us today. Community foundations and funding is the theme of the discussion. And before I introduce our guests, I'll introduce myself. My name is Pete Smith, and I'm your host. And I'm also the Executive and Creative Director of the Canadian Centre for Rural Creativity. And it remains an honor and a privilege to be here. Today, I am talking to you from the city of Toronto, the east end of the town, and I want to acknowledge that I am on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and further acknowledge that Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We invite you to share the lands that you live on and are participating from today in the chat section, if you like. We want to thank the Recovery Cohort and others who are supporting the creation of these great sessions. They include the BC Association of Emergency Managers and BC Hydro. And as with each of these sessions, a special shout out is in order to the wonderful Deb Borzos, the #1 producer of this important web series. Now, any resources or information or comments you have to share can be added to the chat section throughout today's session, so please do. There will be a list made and shared of links, as well as presenters' contact information at the end of the series. If you want to contact a presenter or find information shared from a particular session before then, please be in touch via the following link: Community Disaster Recovery, all lowercase, @gmail.com. Alexa, our IT producer, thank you to her, will post it in the chat, along with links for the British Columbia Association for Emergency Managers and for the Canadian Centre for Rural Creativity. The sessions are being recorded, as you heard, and will be kept on the BC Association of Emergency website. Now, it usually takes us about a week or so to get them loaded to the site, so please be patient with us. During the presentations, please leave your video and audio turned off, as for some attending, it can offer challenges with instability and connection. We have an hour or so, so I will get right to it. I'll introduce each guest, and we'll turn things over to them one at a time. They each have approximately 10 to 15 minutes to speak, and we'll save the Q&A for after the final presentation. I'll keep an eye on the chat for your questions and observations and reflections as the presenters give us their insights, and we'll get to as many of those as we are able following the presentations. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce a new friend from south of the border. This is Brian Fogel. He's the president of the Community Foundation of the Ozarks. Now, prior to joining CFO, he spent 30 years in banking in Springfield. His hometown is Aurora, Missouri, where he's a graduate of Aurora High School. He has his BBA and MBA in banking and finance from the University of Mississippi. Brian has been active in numerous civic and nonprofit groups. He currently chairs the Good Community Committee and co-chairs the Healthy Living Alliance, and is on the board of the Every Child Promise, the Downtown Council of Champions, the Missouri Scholarship and Loan Foundation, and the Missouri College Access Network. He previously served on the Missouri Coordinating Board for Higher Education and the Federal Reserve Board Community Advisory Council. He was awarded the O. Franklin Kenworthy Leadership Award in 1990, the National Community Leadership Award in 1993, and the Springfieldian Award in 2010, and received an honorary doctorate of humane letters from Drury University in December 2011. His motto in life is often wrong, seldom in doubt. He is also a fan of the Ozark Mountain Daredevils, I found out. And Brian, I'm going to turn things over to you with a great big thanks.
Peter, it's truly my honor and privilege to be with all of you. And again, we share a lot. You're between the United States and Canada, although we might pronounce process and process differently, and out and oat, we have a lot of similarities. And one of those similarities certainly is natural disasters and what we're dealing with. Prior to coming on, we were just visiting about that, and it seems like it's happening much more often, and that's because it is. I happen to have the privilege also of sitting on the Center for Disaster Philanthropy Advisory Board, and they have a chart I couldn't get my hands on to show you all, but it is happening, flooding, tornadoes, atmospheric rivers, bomb cyclones, all of these things, wildfires are happening at a increasingly alarming rate. And so I appreciate all of your work in preparing and planning, so we'll be able to respond more to that. I want to share, if I can, my PowerPoint and just talk to you a little bit about what our experience is. And we have worked in natural disasters going back probably 20 years. And here in the Ozarks, it's flooding and it is tornadoes. But there are a lot of dissimilarities between natural disasters, but certainly a lot of similarities. And many of you know you're dealing with these each and every day, but there tends to be an anatomy to a disaster. The first part is when people are coming in and offering relief. For here, we have Salvation Army, Red Cross, Convoy of Hope, and others that are there providing the immediate assistance. Here in our country, we have FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Association, that does a lot of the work with the debris removal. That's kind of their role that they play. And then comes the planning, and that can be at a state or local or federal level of planning. And then what our role has always been here at the Community Foundation has been recovery. And I think it's interesting to note after a national disaster, a big disaster that gets media attention, the peak day of giving is day 4 after it's happened. You know, the cable television stations are there. There's a lot of focus on it. And you'll see those stories running over and over again. And it elicits people wanting to give money and help and show up. But again, that peaks in day 4 and goes away. What we can do is a place-based funder like Community Foundation of the Ozarks, or many of you on this call that are funders, is we're here in day 1, and we're here, in Joplin tornado, many of you might have heard about. We made our final grant on the 5th anniversary of the tornado, 5 years later, because those needs continue. Just some lessons learned that we have seen time and time again. People want to help sometimes too much. You'll have truckloads, carloads, people with chainsaws, et cetera, wanting to help and sometimes looking for things to do. And it takes a lot of time and effort even to manage those volunteers. So having a plan for that is important. In Joplin, after that F5 tornado, we had a huge problem of way too much stuff. We had semis showing up day after day with stuffed animals, with clothes, with all sorts of things that in fact filled up every warehouse, empty warehouse that we could find in the area for about 90 miles outside of Joplin. And we do a lot of work and communicating, saying, don't send stuff, send checks. But that doesn't get, people want to help, and we understand that, but there's a problem with too much stuff on disasters like this. And after the immediate relief area efforts, there are those interim issues that we see, trying to relocate folks, find interim, find housing for them while housing is being located. Joplin, in a period of about 2 years, lost about 10% of its population because there were no housing there because of the destruction in that that community. There were 162 lives lost in that F5 tornado that day, now 11 years ago. The other thing we've run into several times is managing expectations. We've had a lot of folks in tornadoes. There was another tornado that hit back about 19 years ago in a little town called Stockton. And I was up there quite often. And what they said is, by golly, we're going to build back, and we're going to build back now, and we're going to show the world. And they wanted to build these old historic buildings back into metal buildings just to get out of the ground and show people. And what we tried to do is say, don't think about tomorrow, but think about the future of your community and what children want to see. What's that built environment? And maybe a metal building isn't what you want to demonstrate. So it's not the speediness of coming there, but it is much more about thinking long-term about what do you want your community to look like if it's been destroyed. And then the other thing I find very, very interesting, and there's been some research done on this, in every disaster we've been a part of, there is a huge impact on leadership. So, and it's typically long-term. So again, getting back to the anatomy of a disaster, usually there's shock, and there is just trying to pick up the pieces. But after a while, people start saying, we're going to rally together. We're going to get together. They want to be together, and they want to show the world what they can do. And there tends to be coalescing around this thing that we're going to build back. But after several, after a year or two, and money starts flowing everywhere, there's federal dollars and philanthropic dollars, et cetera. And then that's where skepticism, cynicism starts leaking in, unfortunately. And that usually comes back to the leadership. Leaders are trying to do the best they know how to do in a short amount of time with a lot of dollars flying around. But what we have seen, for instance, in Joplin, 5 years after their tornado, the mayor was voted out of office, the city manager was fired, the superintendent was fired, the school board turned over, and that happens again and again and again. So preparing for that is something I think we could all do a better job of. The other thing I would just finally want to say is, and that saying of a emergency and a disaster is no time to make friends. And so our lesson from Joplin is, here in our own county and community, we have a plan in place. We have learned the lessons that by day 4 of the disaster, that all the funders have agreed to come together and sit around the table and talk about how can we best work together and allocate our scarce resources. We tried to do that in Joplin, and it didn't work because everybody was dealing with, again, the immediacy of the disaster. We tried to get the government, we tried to get private funders together, all of that, and we just could never get their attention. So again, we have the most flexible dollars as community foundations. What we wanted to make sure is we weren't duplicating anything that the public funding was available for. And unfortunately, we weren't able to do that. In a final comment, our experience in Joplin was that between all of our work, between schools and the community, et cetera, we raised about $13 million that came through funds here for everything from replanting trees to helping pets to helping domestic violence and mental health issues, et cetera, as the community tried to rebuild. I'm very proud of the work we did there. Joplin, now 10 years later, is a remarkable community. It has come back. It is the smallest community now in our country that has both a medical school and a dental school. Neither one were there prior to the tornado. So again, they use this example of a disaster that they turned into something transformative to reinvent and rebuild themselves. And I'm happy to say they've done that. Joplin's a community of about 80,000. So I'll just stop my remarks there, and I know we'll have some questions later. But again, it's such a privilege to be here. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian. That was awesome. Many things you said in there. Too much can sometimes be too much, which I think is a really interesting thought. What do children want to see in recovery? Think long term. Love that. And leadership can be tricky. And I love the idea of not wanting to duplicate services, which actually leads us nicely into our next guest, Rob Lemire. He grew up in the Nicola Valley and has been a part of the business community in Merritt and Kamloops, BC from a very young age. He has been in Kamloops for over 20 years, working as a commercial insurance broker. As the managing partner of Kamloops' newest insurance brokerage, Wilson M. Beck Insurance Services in Kamloops, Inc., he is very proud to be an active part of our community and honored to be a member and past president of the BC Interior Community Foundation Board of Directors. Seeing his hometown flooded in the BC floods of 2021 was absolutely heart-wrenching, and it made the creation of the new BC Disaster Relief Fund extra special to be a part of. Brian, I really appreciate you being here, and I'm looking forward to what you have to say on this very important topic. And I think Brian has kind of kicked things off nicely to hand the ball to you, as it were. So over to you.
He certainly has. It was a great lead into what we want to talk about today. And thank you very much for that, Brian. It was literally perfect. I'd like to start off by acknowledging that we are here on the land of the Secwepemc First Nations. The most recent, earlier in 2021, acknowledged that the findings of the grave of 215 First Nations children were found on site. And just wanted to acknowledge that, and also acknowledge that our local chief of our First Nations is going to see the Pope, I believe later this year, getting a personal sit down with him, which is significant and very well worth mentioning. So yeah, I'm the past president of the BC Interior Community Foundation, and being from Merritt, BC, yeah, it just threw me for a loop. Kind of initially running around all over the place, trying to, Facebook messages to friends and friends of friends and people I went to high school with, who needs what, running around like a chicken with my head cut off, not knowing if I was doing good or not, or just literally running around like a chicken. And it was, and then being an insurance guy, I was working long hours digging into insurance wordings to see what we were going to be able to do for my 46 clients in Merritt itself. So really got to learn about the BC Disaster Relief Fund that was provided through the province, and learn what was going to be covered there, what wasn't going to be, and we were trying to educate people. But it was so new to us. Everything was really tricky. So hearing Brian speak of experience, I feel that we're going to be able to glean from that. Had we known about the peak giving day, man, I think we could have raised more money than we already did. And we are still hoping to raise more. I mean, we are very proud of what we've done. In a matter of a couple of weeks, we managed to get $350,000 at, well, a new fund created faster than our foundation has ever created, being new to the disaster relief fund world. And then we managed to get $350,000 initially, and we're working on getting that up to $1 million. And what we did, I'll just speak to a little bit what we ended up doing as a board, is we connected with Calgary, Alberta, the Calgary Foundation, because they had gone through their floods in 2008, and so they had been through all this, just like Brian and the community of Joplin. So we called them right away and asked for advice, and what they said echoed what Brian said, is, well, hold tight, make sure we don't just start doling out money, because we need to make sure that we are able to fill those gaps and not be providing funds where those funds could be available elsewhere, through the Red Cross or the government. So we're taking that advice, and at this exact moment we are sitting back working on our grant applications. which are going to be mirroring those that were used in Calgary. And we want to be here with funds, day 365, day 1500, because for those people who are, whether it be mental health challenges, or like the Calgary Foundation said, it may be just a business person who hasn't been able to get their business back up and running, and hopefully get them some funds to get them by, pay some mortgages. It'll, small amounts here, there, and everywhere. So we're here today, Kathy and myself, to talk a little bit more about the fund. We would like to promote the fund, because by all means, if anybody is able or has some funds in their community foundation that they're able to shift into this fund, it would be greatly appreciated, because this is going to be a long haul recovery. And yeah, so that's kind of why we're here. And then we're hoping to pick your brains, because we do have, we're learning. We don't want to pretend that we know everything, because we really don't. We felt like we needed to do something. We've done it. And for the next 6 months, year, 5 years. Oh, I guess the other thing I'd like to point out is that, because being a foundation, 90% of the funds are going to be flow through for immediate, for money to go through to people right away. And then 10% is actually going to go into an endowment, so that we have funds available sooner next time. And we will have that hopefully have the same plan, or one that's just as good as Brian has, and the Ozarks Community Foundation. So that's kind of me. And Peter, am I introducing Kathy, or?
I don't mind taking the reins from you, Rob, but I know you're going to be swinging back through, and I think what you're doing in the foundation and seeking conversations about what to do, I think is really, really smart with people who are involved in it and impacted by it. I think that's a great way to go. So look forward to that conversation that's coming up after Kathy's presentation. So I will now introduce our third and final guest. Her name is Kathy Humphreys, and she was the executive director of the Kamloops Symphony Society, the KSS, for almost 30 years, until her retirement in 2019. She was instrumental in the development of the Kamloops Symphony from a primarily amateur orchestra with an annual budget of just $160,000 to the professional orchestra that it is today. Kathy was also the impetus behind the creation of the Kamloops Symphony Music School, which is awesome, which was introduced in 2002 to provide opportunities for musicians to live and work in Kamloops while offering high-quality professional music instruction for students of all ages from throughout the region. During Kathy's tenure, a variety of matching grant opportunities, special fundraising initiatives, and strong community support helped the KSS increase its endowment fund to over $1 million, providing a reliable, ongoing revenue source. Kathy continues to support the arts in Kamloops region as a volunteer member of the board of directors of the Kamloops Center for the Arts Society. She's a strong believer in the importance of investing in the future of our community. She has also been a member of the board of directors of the BC Interior Community Foundation, the BCICF, for more than 15 years. She is the foundation's vice president, chairs the marketing committee, co-chairs the scholarship committee, and is currently working as volunteer acting executive director. Last year, Kathy worked as a volunteer at the Kamloops Evacuation Center, assisting both wildfire and flood evacuees. She has since become a regular member of the Kamloops ESS team and is currently taking courses to increase her knowledge and effectiveness in ESS work. It is my pleasure to have her speak here today and learn from her. It's great to have you here, Kathy. So I'll turn things over to you and then look forward to the conversation afterwards.
Okay, I think I'm there now. Am I there now? Yes, I am. Okay, hi everyone. Thanks so much for attending this webinar, and thank you, Deb, for inviting us to participate, and Brian for hosting this. Thank you, Rob, for your part of the presentation, and Brian as well. That was very interesting. So the the reason for starting this fund, we've already talked about a bit, but I think goes a little bit deeper than that in some ways, because in the Kamloops region, we haven't just been impacted by fires and flooding and other disasters like that in the last year. We've also, over a number of years, seen some pretty mostly devastating fire seasons, really. But although this year, I think it was both the fires and the floods, but it seems to be becoming more frequent, and it seems to be becoming more disastrous, I guess you might say. So there was that. Also, the Community Foundation model generally rests on endowment funds. So we raise money, we invest the money, and the income is distributed through grants and other disbursements in the community. But that's a long-term, very long-term view, really, of funding. A lot of other larger community foundations receive donations that they're able to use more immediately, and we have never done that before. So when this happened and we brought it to the board, said, look, we have to be able to raise some money that we can use right away to help our communities. And at times in the past when we've talked about those things, the board has been kind of reluctant because of the focus on endowment. This time they were all in favor. Seeing what was happening to our friends and neighbors was just so, it was just hard to fathom what they were going through. And working at the evacuation center, for me, I was seeing and hearing stories that I just couldn't imagine having to go through that myself. And it was something we really, really wanted to help address. So let's see now. But as we've already discussed, we see that there are other funding avenues available for people that have been impacted, and those are announced, quite regularly. We hear about new opportunities for people to apply for government funding or Red Cross funding or something else that's going on, and finding out where we fit into that structure and what unmet important needs we can potentially meet with the funding that we have available has been a bit of a challenge. So I've reached out to some organizations like the Thompson-Nicola Regional District, and I've spoken with the City of Merritt, and we've also had people contact us, individuals as well as organizations, saying, okay, so how can we apply for some money? And I've said, well, we're not really quite ready yet. We're trying to figure out what is the most important need or needs that we can address and how to do that. Some of the things that I've heard from people that have been important to them that they would like to see addressed are things like, well, there's debris removal, there's feed and other needs of farmers, there's mental health supports, I was told housing, and also the navigating the process of going through construction, like how to deal with contractors and that kind of thing, or even find them. I was told that artists in Lytton, for example, lost all their art supplies, so that's their livelihood gone. And that a museum was burned down. It lost a lot of Indigenous artifacts in particular that may be able to be replaced if they had some funding to do that. There's just a huge number of a variety of things that could be looked at. So not wanting to decide that the money was needed for X and that we were going to say, okay, so we've got money for this. If that was not a thing that wasn't already addressed, or was not something that people actually thought was important or that they needed, we thought it would be best to consult with the communities themselves, the people working there on the ground and seeing what's happening and hearing from the people who were impacted, what their story is now and what challenges they're facing, that would be a better way to figure out how to direct our assistance. And so this is I feel it's a great opportunity. I'm hoping there are people on this webinar that are going to be able to give us some suggestions or guidance in how to go forward to make sure that we have the best impact that we can with the funding that we have available. That's pretty much where we're at and why we're here. So I wouldn't mind if we moved on to the question portion of the presentation now, if that's okay with you.
That's great. Thanks, Kathy. You and Rob make a great team. I will ask Brian if you'll come off, join us on the screen, and the three of you can stay unless we have some issues, but you can stay on audio and visual, so folks can see you. So this new funds, and Brian, please weigh in as we go along. A disaster in the United States is a disaster in British Columbia. These things are not exclusive to any one community. You mentioned debris removal, Kathy, the feed for the animals, mental health, contractor issues, artists who lost their supplies, the museum are burnt down. These are all worthy of funding. But you've also asked some questions, and I'm going to bring up a couple of the questions, and please, guests, you can pop in your questions yourself, or thoughts or observations, reflections, etc. in the chat, or if you want, you can also come off mute and you can also speak directly to the folks. So this is one of the questions that Rob and Kathy sent along. Can the attendees help us identify the current and anticipated needs in their impacted communities? They've also asked, can they identify charitable organizations that are able to help address some of the needs? And this is in and around the duplication piece. And then they ask, should we develop our own application process or identify needs and allow municipalities and charitable organizations to determine who needs and who is eligible for the support? So if we can just start with the first question that they asked, which is, can you all that are out there in webinar land help us identify the current and anticipated needs in your community or in communities that you've seen? So Deb Borzo says here, do you have to put a time limit on your application? Okay, so here we go. And you please feel free to answer, any one of you. Do you have to put a time limit on your application intakes, or can you make it open-ended or up to perhaps 18 months to allow most communities to apply? So I don't know, Rob or Kathy, if you'd like to take that.
I'm actually gonna ask Brian his opinion on it as well. What we were thinking at the moment, well, currently we do two granting dates a year. So we do them in April and October. So ideally, and then so we have application process for, I can't remember whether it's a month or two before that. We have a deadline. That being said, we have been known in other types of emergencies when there was some COVID funding to take applications midterm in there as well. So we haven't decided. We basically want to be there for as needs need to be met. So if applications came in, we would have specific deadlines, I think, Kathy, planned, but it's something I'm not on the granting committee, so I can't say, but if Brian had advice, I would by all means take it.
Yeah, Rob, we kept our fund open for 5 years, and what we tried to do, our first grants, the tornado hit in May, and what we learned, we did a lot of talking with a lot of nonprofits and folks in FEMA and the city, et cetera, to kind of see what unmet needs were, to learn where we could help. Our first grants in August of that year of the tornado just worked to what we say are second responders, not the Salvation Armies or Red Crosses, but those local ones that were, again, helping with the disaster but just what happens when a disaster hits, donors quit giving. And there's no donors, there's no events, there's no any way for them to get local money. So we just simply gave grants to about 12 different nonprofits, literally to keep their doors open. That's what we did. Then what we noticed was childcare. People couldn't get childcare, and they were trying to rebuild their houses. They were trying to work through insurance. They were trying, and there's just a lot of stuff they were trying to work through. Excuse me. It's pollen in the air here in the Ozarks, so sorry about that. But what we tried to do is say, okay, we need to build back the capacity of childcare centers so people can drop off their kids and do the work that needs to be done to start the rebuilding of their own household. And then what we saw is, a year later, we saw churches that had given out a lot of money and all of that were then needing to replenish pantries, things like that. So we did that. So we kind of did rolling requests for 5 years. And like I said, we gave our very last grant away, and it was for we built a lot of houses. We probably, of that 13 million, probably 2 million of it went to a group called Rebuild Joplin that were rebuilding uninsured homeowners, or that had gaps between insurance and what it was costing to rebuild. So we did a lot of housing projects over a multi-year. So what we tried to do is just be responsive to the needs, but we focused on recovery. If there was somebody that said, I want to help immediately, even our donors, we would say, then you need to give to the Red Cross or the Convoy of Hope or Salvation Army. If that's what you want to do, give to them. But if you want to give to a long-term recovery, that's what our fund is. And that's what we opened our fund is. But I think the main thing, Rob, is just listening and talking and really trying to figure out what are those unmet needs and then what can we do to help meet them.
Excellent, thank you. I have one quick question. The rebuilding, this is phenomenal, by the way. The rebuilding group, was that a not-for-profit that just kind of kicked up and started building homes, or how did that work?
Yeah, it was fascinating. So yes, it was not it was not in organization prior to them, and because of Katrina, Hurricane Katrina that devastated the Gulf Coast and New Orleans, there was a group down there that started a housing program to rebuild New Orleans, and so again, people can be so amazing. They sent a crew up here, and it was called St. Bernard Parish, I believe, was the group. And so Rebuild Joplin came out of that, of just saying, we need something like that. The other thing that happened is Toyota sent a whole group of engineers. I mean, Toyota is great at logistics. And what Joplin, the city government, is having a hard time is how many homes are damaged, where are they? So Toyota sent all these engineers up, and there was literally this huge room that was a war room that just had maps. It had, here's a category 1 house, category 2, category 3. And then that's what Rebuild said, okay, we're going to work on these and we're going to go to the worst ones first and the ones. And so it was very logistics oriented, but we had the right people there, and it was Toyota that just said, we're going to help however we can. So it is amazing to me, the help. One final thing I'll say, just again, in the middle of a disaster, the kind of the reinforcement of the wonderful human nature and spirit there is. And we got Brad Pitt to give us money, Angelina Jolie. We got a $2 million grant from a private foundation. But my very favorite grant was, we've got $42 of cash from 6th graders in New York City that put up a lemonade stand. And they helped people they'd never met, never heard of, never anything, but they had a lemonade stand. They sent us $42. That meant as much to me as Brad and Angelina's the $500,000 gift. So again, lots of people willing to help.
That's amazing.
It is.
So can I jump in for a second?
Yeah, please, Kathy. Yes. Yeah.
One of the issues that we have as a community foundation, and I'm guessing yours is probably similar, Brian, but I'm not sure, is that we are not able to give money to individuals. We can only give to registered charities. And so from that point of view, it's difficult. Like, if we're going to get applications from someone, it's going to have to be from organizations. Or there may be other ways. I was talking to a representative from Community Foundations of Canada, and she talked about some things that happened in Alberta, and where there was a company that was willing to help with new appliances. for people who had lost their homes. And the foundation was able to work through an organization that would purchase the appliances and say, here, we've got, for 20 homeowners, we've got, a complete set of appliances for each one that we can, they don't get to choose what they get, but, I come and get them, kind of thing. So there were a couple of ideas like that she had, like contracting a nonprofit to do some of the work. The ones that are more hands-on, those kinds of things. And I think we're going to need some of those ideas, because we are not going to be able to accept applications and give money to individuals for their own particular need. It's going to have to be broader than that.
Right.
Right. Kathy, you're exactly right. No, and we don't do that, and we wouldn't do that. We're not case managers. We don't have that expertise. So all of our grants went to nonprofits that do case management, that could sit down and work with that family to see what their needs are and help fill that gap. So we don't do that. I do know of a community foundation that got into that business, and what they did is just took all of their money and divided by the amount of people that came to see them. And that's the exact wrong thing to do, because there are some people that needed a lot more than that, a lot of people that needed less than that. So we will not give to individuals. The one exemption and exception to that is we have something here called company benevolence funds. And we actually opened 7 of them in 1 week in Joplin. So these are companies based in Joplin that, again, open benevolence funds here. And then we could pay expenses on their behalf. So there were over 7,000 cars damaged or totaled in Joplin. So, for them, for their employees trying to replace cars, uninsured, underinsured, we could pay for a car. We didn't give money directly to anybody, but in a company benevolence fund, we do those. And we did a lot of those in Joplin.
Great. There are some questions coming in the Zoom, so maybe we'll touch down on those and we'll circle back to the other questions, but that's great. This conversation for sure. Lots of great ideas coming your way, Rob and Kathy. A question from Deb. Could you support community-led woody debris removal, specifically as opposed to man-made debris? Is that within your mandate, do you think, or is that an idea that you'd take back to the board?
I don't see why we couldn't. I mean, we could definitely take it to the board. We would, like Kathy said, and we would have to work with a not-for-profit that would also benefit. Basically, so, I mean, our mandate is to assist our communities in our area. So if it falls within that mandate and it falls within supporting not-for-profits, I think we can consider it. It's really on a very basic level.
Is there some particular need that you know about, Deb, in one of the communities, or like what prompted that particular idea?
Oh, yes, there is a lot of need to get rid of woody debris around the central region, I happen to know. So that's why it came up, because the man-made debris, there is a project that is doing that, but the woody debris is a much greater challenge.
So I think that the challenge, and I can see why it would be a challenge, because you're going to need experts that would be able to go in and do so, and then we would need them to be affiliated with a not-for-profit, because that's going to be a very specialized, skill.
Or a municipality.
Yep.
That could contract someone to do it. That's the other possibility.
Okay, thank you.
There is a question. Oh, sorry, Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, one of the challenges that we are facing is that the municipalities, they are quite hesitant to take the charge on it, because they don't, well, I guess leading to what Brian said, they don't want to take the responsibility of who gets what, because in fear of the backlash and having to deal with that. So though they appreciate what we are doing, they don't want to be the ones cutting the checks for us. We are hoping that the TNRD comes, the regional district is more willing, but that is a challenge we have.
There's a question here from Cheryl from CDART, and CDART is an acronym for Canadian Disaster Animal Rescue Team. They have limited funding for recovery. The donor requested that we try to use it in the central region for livestock. How can we best find the folks that need the money? We are 100% volunteer led, so don't want an avalanche of requests. Could we piggyback on an existing process within your fund, I think is what she's asking here. So Kathy, do you want to take that?
Yeah, it sounds like that's something we could discuss between us. And if that would be helpful for them to funnel their funds into our foundation and have our granting committee receive applications, or yeah, there might be a way to work that out. So sure, we could talk about it.
Great. Okay. Now moving on to housing, which is something, Brian, you were talking about and the importance of that, obviously. So funding, this comes from Deb, could go to a housing society that may then partner with a local government to build housing. Could you support that? Could the fund support that sort of arrangement? Yeah,
absolutely. I heard an interesting story. I have to tell you this.
Yeah.
About rebuilding in Lytton. There's a project between the community of Lytton and the University of British Columbia to build small homes using a what do you call it? Oh, I've lost it now.
Is that a 3D printer?
Pardon me?
Is that
3D printer. That's right. A
Yeah.
3D printer, and it sounds absolutely amazing. Apparently, they can build it was a 640 square foot home, you know, minus the finishing and the windows and things like that, but you know, like the outer structure within 48 hours using a giant 3D printer. And that's just boggling my mind. I'm trying to picture it happening, and it's pretty exciting though, because wow, what a fast fix to the immediate need for some housing. And anyway, I'm interested to see how that goes.
Yeah, that's being done in conjunction with University of British Columbia and Merritt as well. They're hoping to get their first house done in April.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool.
it is very, very cool. Yeah. I made a mistake. The Canadian Disaster Animal Response Team. It's not a rescue team. So that's what CDART stands for. So if you see an application coming your way from them, or a conversation perhaps, because I know right now you're hoping to have a series of conversations. So that's you may be hearing from them, from Cheryl. So just moving on to your, because I think Brian, again, you three of you can enter into this, and anyone in the audience. Can folks identify charitable organizations that are able to help address some of the needs? And while they're different in the States, I know there are some similar crossover ones. Brian, I don't know, how do you want to arrange this? If people want to pop something into the chat, I can follow that. But do you want to open this up, Rob and Kathy, and maybe get some thoughts from Brian on this?
Yeah, I thought if we have to give to and we do have to give to charitable organizations. So say, I know that there's been a lot of talk about mental health supports, and I'm sure that is a issue that we have in BC, probably in all of Canada, maybe in the whole world right now. Anyway, and there's, I know, particularly hard hit, sectors of the population in that need as well. But if we were going to try to do something for those communities that were impacted by the floods, for example, like, can the communities identify, a organization that is doing good work, or that has a project they want to, or a special program for youth, or a special program for, people who lost their homes, that we could contribute to, that it would be great to know about those. And obviously we can directly approach municipalities or, the recovery teams in those communities to find out about those things. But I thought maybe people on this webinar would have some suggestions.
Okay, that's great. So we've got a couple, I think, the CDART and maybe with a housing partner as well. But are there any other out there, any other folks you want to just add? Just drop them into the chat. And Brian, what was your experience with that, with regards to charitable organizations that were able to address the needs? Were there new ones that came forward? Were there ones that were born because of the disaster? How did that go?
Yeah, those we would call secondary responders, and they were all existing ones. So a couple of things that happened. Mental health certainly is a big issue, and we funded a lot of additional counselors in the school because it's traumatic to the students and the kids. And so those were some grants that we made. The other thing that we saw and is happening a lot is there's an increase in domestic violence, unfortunately, because a lot of times when homes are destroyed, families are doubling up. There's all sorts of things you're dealing with, trying to put your household back together. You may be economically, impacted and lost your job. Just lots of stressors. So domestic violence goes up. So we funded several of those and several shelters that, again, those folks being impacted could get away from that house and go have a place to stay. The other thing, Peter, to your question about the nonprofit community. So what we do here is there's something called the Long-Term Recovery Committee. And that is something that is formalized, that is the city, the state government, the federal government, the big responders. We sat at that table and they met every week for weeks and weeks and weeks. So we could hear firsthand, what are those things they're dealing with and all of that. There's also a separate group called COAD, Committees, Organizations Active in Disasters. And those are just strictly nonprofits. And so they got together on a regular basis. So that would be animal groups, animal shelters. That would be your mental health providers and domestic violence providers, et cetera, et cetera. So we would try to be at all of those meetings too, so we could ask questions and learn about the needs they're having. The last thing I just want to would want to add, probably unrelated to this, but I think a question I've asked after every, and we've had flooding, we've had tornadoes, we've had winds, we had ice storms, and I always ask, what does recovery look like? Because in my opinion, if we put people right back where they were, we haven't done our job. So if we're putting people back in areas now prone to flooding with global climate differential, so we need to think differently about mitigation versus just putting people right back where they were. And there's a tendency to want to do that and say, boy, we've recovered and everybody's back into the same houses. We made grants for a bunch of houses to put safe rooms in there. So next time there's a tornado, they have somewhere to go to. So it's not just working on what the present needs are, but it's thinking about the future and how can you minimize that future risk.
Yeah, no, that's great. You brought that up a couple of times, and it's it is something that needs to be considered, obviously, and I'm sure you with this fund are thinking in that way. You mentioned long-term recovery committee, Brian, and committees active in disasters, that these organizations are kind of larger organizations that have a whole bunch of organizations that meet once a week or every couple of weeks. Is there something like that in British Columbia? Is there something like a long-term recovery committee that has representatives from a whole bunch of different disaster relief? Deb, anyone out there in the wide world? And then there's another question. Deb, go ahead. Yeah.
I can speak from the provincial side. There is a NGO committee that has been meeting, but that's strictly through the province. But I think it would be a great idea to form a group of groups and a regular check-in with other groups around the province, nonprofits or others. Every time you can connect and collaborate, you make yourself stronger. So, yeah.
Thank you. Cheryl. Cheryl, you can come off mute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
There we are.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, the group that Deb's referring to, I think is probably the IDCBC. If that's not, yeah. So, and originally the IDCBC was supposed to be a joint sort of NGO EMBC thing, but it's kind of morphed into something that's being run by EMBC. So, but most of the NGOs that are involved with it, I think would be amenable to, having our own group. I don't know. just, I was there in the Wayback Machine when it started way back.
Right. I just think the whole fear of duplication, if we don't know what other people are doing, we're going to fall into, we're just going to duplicate. It's not efficient, basically. And so I love the idea of that. So anyway, that's something to consider from this session, but we've got some things coming in here that I think I'd like you to answer, you folks. This from Jeff. Loved hearing about the new schools in Joplin. Can funding be directed specifically to support new future-focused industries to create long-lasting employment opportunities, perhaps micro grants or loans for entrepreneurs? Is this something that you have been discussing at the fund? This is for Kathy and Rob.
Sounds a bit beyond the scope of what we would be able to do, but I suppose if there is a merit venture, or what do you call it? No, I forget that word too. It's the venture in here. It's venture Kamloops in Kamloops. So they may have a similar kind of thing, or an economic development group there that could do that kind of thing. Like we're a really small organization with a small part-time staff, like 2 part-time staff members, and so leading things or getting too heavily involved is really hard for us to do unless our volunteers are able to do it. And we have volunteers that have some time, but we have other volunteers that are really busy with their own work, and it's not always something that we can do. But yeah, there may be organizations that could get involved in something like that.
So I have one more from Lynn. Actually, there's another from Deb, but we're getting close to the end here now. And so I'd like to read Lynn's out, and anyone can respond to this. So Lynn asks, would a group like the Royal Canadian Legion, and I know you have legions in the States as well, Brian, qualify to apply for funds? The local legions did not raise the normal amount of funds this year that they generally use for ongoing supporting of vets, not included in federal vet support. Even sponsored social activities could help with healing. Is that something that the fund would be willing to engage in conversation about, at least? So a fund for Legion vets, etc.
Well, I think the Royal Canadian Legion is probably a charitable organization. I don't know for sure. It has to be a registered charity, but they could apply.
I'm sure it is, yeah.
And that would be up to the committee reviewing the grants to decide if that was a use of funds that they would support. But yeah, I don't see why not, as long as it's a charity.
So finally, Rob, go ahead.
Yeah. The only thing I would add is to Kat, when we were talking about the trades and potential there, is to add to what Kathy was saying, is what we are really kind of looking for is for not-for-profits that are already spearheading these things and maybe need the funding, right? We can't go and find, say, the Home Builders Association and say, hey, can you do this? Let's do this. We don't have the ability to do that. What we are hoping through this is to spread the word to not-for-profits in the interior of BC. Say, hey, do you need some funding for something? Well, we have this fund, and we will be putting out grant applications and deadlines. So that's what we want to do today as well, is just, hey, spread the word. If you're talking to not-for-profits in Merritt, Lytton, et cetera, those are the primary ones. Princeton has their own foundation and have their own fund. But hey, please spread the word and have them reach out to us, because if those not-for-profits have initiatives and they're spearheading things, those are things that we hope to support.
Great. Deb's got regionally, it would be interesting to have a stand-up meeting of local nonprofits as opposed to larger NGOs to address the need to understand who is doing what locally. I think that's a smart idea. And then possibly the BCAEM could help coordinate such a meeting, Kathy and Rob. You'll get all this information because we're being recorded. We are at 4 o'clock. I want to thank the three of you. I know this conversation, really, we've just got nicely started in it, but I think there've been some good ideas. I applaud what you're doing. Brian, you've been just a fantastic guest here, and what you've had to say is really, really appreciated. And I know it's landed not only for Kathy and Rob, but for all of us. And it's always just nice to have someone from south of the border up in Canada. So I want to thank the three of you. And I also want to remind everybody that March 30th between noon and 1 p.m. Pacific time is our final webinar in this, our second season of presentations on recovery and disaster relief. And I encourage folks to come out for the episode and let others know about it. The theme next time is relocation and climate change. As mentioned, this session and all the sessions can be accessed through the BC Association of Emergency website. And any questions you have, please send them along to communitydisasterrecovery@gmail.com. Large thanks to you all. So until next time, take care of yourselves and keep the Ukraine in your thoughts, please. That's it. So we will be signing off. Travel well.
you.
Yes, I
Thank
hope.
you so much.
Best
Yeah.
wishes, everyone.